All right, here's the December 6th meeting of the Planning Commission. A couple notes. Agenda item number 5 will include presentations from both staff and an outside consulting attorney. The attorney will be referring to a number of legal cases during his presentation. Attached is a list of these cases that I have up here. Some of these cases will be included in the PowerPoint. All right. Otherwise, we have the agenda in front of us, looking for a motion to approve the order of agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second. A motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item number B, the minutes from our November 1st meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? Anyone want to make a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to the public hearing items. We will move on to number 1. Donald will come to the podium and introduce it.
Thank you, Commissioners. Commissioner Schneider, I also set an additional notes up there for you, just some more background for you. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Donald Kress with the Department of Planning and Development. Our first item here is the West Track 4th edition here, which is located along Fiechner Drive right here. It is currently parts of 2 lots developed together. There is a construction company office and a mini storage there. The proposal here is a minor subdivision. This is what it looks like on the street here, looking along the property frontage along Fiechner Drive. There's a construction company and the mini storage. And facing here, the new lot line is just going to weave its way between these buildings here and separate these 2 uses. The zoning is limited industrial. The zoning is not going to change. The existing uses fit into the limited industrial zone, as you see there. The plat looks like this. Again, there's the new lot line there and the entire block. We did actually get a couple calls on this from neighboring properties, 1 call and 1 in-person visit from neighboring property owners. They were just interested in what was going on in this area and just wanted to see if their properties were involved in this at all, and they are not, that all the activities confined to the existing property there. The applicant's representative, Nate Volmuth of Goldmark Design and Development, is with us this afternoon. You may wish to address the commission. Staff has reviewed this proposal, and the stated recommendation is in your packet and on the screen. That concludes staff's presentation. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Donald. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, Mr. Volmuth, do you have anything to add?
No comment.
Any question for the applicant? Seeing none, is there anybody else as part of the public hearing that would like to weigh in on this item, either for or against? Seeing nobody else, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I'll make the motion to accept the findings of staff.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take the roll.
Tassa.
Aye.
Morgan.
Aye.
Schmidt.
Aye.
Shuey.
Aye.
Gunkelman.
Aye.
Schneider.
Aye, and the motion passes. Moving to item number 2, and Donald, you want to introduce us?
Yes, sir. This is the Dakota Air Parts Edition. If this sounds a little familiar to some of you who've been on the commission, there was an earlier version of this plat back in the summer of 2021 that did not go forward, but it was on the agenda for a couple of months. This is the same location, but a different configuration. They do have the same name. It's the same owner. This is a proposed major subdivision of a property that's up here on the corner of 39th and a half Avenue and 25th Street North. Here, of course, is Hector International Airport. This small area has several buildings on it. It was platted as the DDK edition in 2003. And there are 3 lots there, and the proposed plat just re-subdivides them into a different configuration. It is a major subdivision because a small dedication of right-of-way along 25th Street North is required. So that's what makes a subdivision a major subdivision, if there's a dedication or vacation of right-of-way. The Site looks like this. Here's the airport is behind us in this picture. Here is 39th and a half and 25th. The operator, the owner, operates an aircraft parts business. There are some existing buildings on here, as you see, a couple different configurations here of the existing buildings and storage buildings. And the zoning here is limited commercial, or limited industrial, limited industrial, and the uses are limited industrial. You will notice in the photograph here, there is a residence here. That building was built in 1890, and it was there when this property was rezoned to limited industrial. It is a non-conforming use. It can stay there, but at the time in 2003, and again now in this subdivision, staff doesn't want to go forward with rezoning that to a residential zone because we don't encourage residential this close to the airport. So that'll just remain a non-conforming use, and it'll be subject to our non-conforming regulations if there's any question about that. So you received earlier today by email an updated plat. What happened here is that just changed the location of the lot lines a little bit to make them better fit the overall plan for this area here. So lot 2 is where the residence is. That'll be on its own lot. And then these areas will be developed with industrial uses relating to the air parts business. The applicant is, again, Nate Volmuth from Goldmark Design and Development. And staff has reviewed this project, and our recommended motion is stated in the staff report and shown on the screen. That concludes staff's presentation. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Donald. 1890, that's an old house. Did Dakota Construction build that, or?
I think it was my first one.
Any questions for Donald? Seeing no questions. Mr. Volmuth, do you have anything to add? Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to add anything to this item, either for or against? Anybody in the audience? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I'll make the motion to approve per staff recommendation.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take the roll.
Gunkelman,
Aye.
Shuey,
Aye.
Morgan,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Tassa,
Aye.
Schneider.
Aye, and motion passes. Moving on to number 3. Donald, stay with you.
Yes, sir, you'll get a change on the next one here. But the next one is the addition, 4th addition, a minor subdivision located here on 38th Street South. This is I-29. 52nd Avenue South is just off the photograph down here. And the Timber Parkway and the new Sweet Shots Golf Place is over here as a locator. There are 2 office buildings on this one lot. The proposal of minor subdivision to divide that into 2 lots with each building on its own lot. Buildings look like this here. 1-story modern-looking office buildings there, recently constructed on the curve of the 38th Street. There is an existing entrance that both buildings share. After the platting, they will continue to share this entrance, and an easement will be provided for that access. There will be no additional accesses granted onto 38th Street. And then there's also, go back here one, there's also a driveway along the side here that provides access both to these apartments and to the backside of the office buildings here. So now you're facing east, you're behind the buildings. The zoning here is limited commercial. There is no zone change proposed. Office buildings are allowed by right in limited commercial. The plat here again just divides the lot in 2 individual lots. The outlines seem to show the buildings actually are indicating that they have been taken out of the floodplain. The dotted areas indicate of the floodplain, so that shows they're taken out of there. So that's why that looks that way. You rarely see building outlines on a plat, but that's why they're there. The applicant's representative here is Tim Gleason of Enclave, and the staff has reviewed this project. The recommended motion is stated in your staff report shown on the screen. That concludes staff's presentation, Commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Any questions from the commission? Seeing none, does the applicant want to add anything? Do we have any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to add anything to this item, either for or against? Seeing nobody rushing to the podium, we'll close the public hearing. And commissioners, what are your wishes?
Move to approve as presented.
Thanks. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any other discussion? Take the roll.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Morgan,
Aye.
Rosenberg,
Aye.
Gunkelman,
Aye.
Tassa,
Aye.
Shuey,
Aye.
Schneider.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Motion passes. Thank you, Donald. We'll call Luke to the podium to introduce item number 4.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Luke Marvin with the City Fargo Planning Department. Item 4 is the District of Fargo 5th Edition, located at 3788 and 3770 55th Avenue South. And to give you some context, if you can see my cursor on the screen, you have I-29, 52nd Avenue South, 38th Street South. You have Walmart here, 55th Avenue South, Tillstone Drive, and then the subject property. The applicant is requesting a minor subdivision entitled the District of Fargo 5th Edition, which is a replat of lots 1 and 2, Block 1, the District of Fargo 4th Edition. It is currently an undeveloped lot with an existing stormwater pond, as you can see in the image. For some site photos, on the top we have from 38th Street South, we're facing north, and you can see the transmission tower, and in general, that's kind of lined up in between the existing properties. And then on the bottom, we're facing south to the vacant lot. The zone is limited commercial and no zone changes proposed. The plat is proposing to combine 2 lots into one, and staff has received and responded to 1 inquiry about this project, just generally wondering what's going on. And staff finds all criteria to be met and are recommending approval. Project Representative Tim Gleason is here to answer any questions, and that concludes staff's presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. Any questions? Go ahead.
Just one question, I take it, that with combining that lot, is that retention pond, and maybe this is a question for Tim, that retention pond takes up a lot of this lot, is that still, is that getting relocated, or is it,
Can I jump in?
yes?
So that is a retention pond needed from the original development. And so we have collaboratively worked with the developer, and it is an easement, it will remain, and then the city maintains the water portion of it.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions for staff? Does the applicant have anything to add? Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, anyone else in the audience like to add anything to this item, either for or against? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I'll make the motion to accept the findings of staff as presented.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll take the roll.
Tassa. Aye. Gunkelman,
Aye.
Rosenberg,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Morgan,
Aye.
Shuey,
Aye.
Schneider.
Aye. Motion passes. We'll ask Mark up to the podium to talk about a text amendment.
Good afternoon. I want to check to make sure our attorney, Scott Berkthold, is on the line. Scott, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, Mark.
Again, good afternoon, Planning Commissioners. Item number 5 is a staff-initiated text amendment on sections of 200401, 200402, 2403, and 201202 of the Land Development Code regarding adult entertainment centers. It's come to our attention that it's been 20 years since that language has been looked at, and we're hoping to modernize that language in our Land Development Code. We've had the opportunity to work with an outside attorney by the name of Scott Berkthold, and the Planning Department of the City Attorney's Office has also contributed to creating this. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Scott.
Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity, and thank you, members of the Planning Commission, to address you this afternoon on this text amendment to the Land Development Code. My presentation is really going to focus primarily on the last 4 pages of the text amendment, which is some findings and some legislative predicate for regulating this area of adult establishments. There should be a PowerPoint on the screen in front of you for today's commission meeting, and I'll be going through that to lay out the rationale for regulating adult establishments and what some of the limitations are. The second slide, if we advance to that, is basically the cornerstone of this area of the law. It's a U.S. Supreme Court case from 1986 called City of Renton versus Playtime Theaters. This is a small bedroom community outside of Seattle, Washington, and essentially some adult theaters moved in and challenged the Renton zoning code, saying, well, you didn't rely on any evidence of adverse impacts from adult uses in the city of Renton, so you're not able to regulate in this area. And ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court said that a city such as Fargo or Davenport, Iowa, where I'm from, can regulate in this area of adult establishments so long as whatever they rely upon is reasonably believed to be relevant to the problems that that city seeks to address or seeks to stave off. And in that context, the courts have allowed cities to rely on a wide variety of secondary effects information. That's the third slide. Courts have recognized many different types of negative secondary effects, and I'll go over those. Those are highlighted on that third slide. Those include negative impacts on surrounding properties, the personal and property crimes and public safety risks that can go along with those crimes. Obviously, lewdness and public indecency and the types of illicit sexual behaviors that you might assume would go with an adult establishment have been documented time and time again. There's also been a correlation with illicit drug use and trafficking in many studies and reports that have been done by land agencies around the country. And then also courts and cities have documented litter and aesthetic impacts from traffic, late night noise, general urban blight. So there are a lot of different negative secondary impacts from adult land uses that the courts have said provide an appropriate basis. Cities cannot ban adult uses, and they can't just try to get rid of them because they don't like them, but they can protect the better areas of town and the better commercial areas from adult use development. And they can do so based on these adverse impacts that have been documented and affirmed by the courts really for more than 4 decades. On the next slide, slide number 4, if you can move to that, when we use this term secondary effects, that is a judicially created term that distinguishes from the primary aspects of speech or the primary effect, which is the psychological impact that the speech has on the listener, and instead focuses on these secondary impacts like land use impact. And the types of evidence that courts have said cities can rely upon include land use reports by other planning agencies, crime impact reports by police departments or study groups. Number 3 is judicial opinions. The U.S. Supreme Court actually upheld the Renton Ordinance because the city of Renton relied on a prior state Supreme Court opinion talking about the negative secondary effects that were experienced in the city of Seattle, a much larger city about 30 miles down the road from them. And then there are also expert reports talking about the data, crime data and land use data associated with these secondary effects. And then number 5 is anecdotal data. The Supreme Court of the United States and lower courts have allowed local jurisdictions to rely on testimony at planning commission hearings or at city council meetings that talk about the adverse impacts of adult uses on a community or on a neighborhood. If we can go to the next slide, the Supreme Court has said, principally in the area of zoning law, that you can regulate to prevent these negative secondary effects, and specifically you can regulate the location And so we've been involved in a number of cases over the years in many different states. One of the recent ones is at the top of the slide 5, page 5 of the slideshow, which is called Stardust 3007 versus City of Brookhaven, Georgia. This is a suburb of Atlanta, basically. And in this case, we represented the city against a sexual device shop store that sought to open in a location that was too close to residential neighborhoods. And ultimately, the challenge to that regulation failed, and the court held, based on a similar legislative record that's been compiled for this text amendment, that the city of Brookhaven was justified in regulating the location of sexual device shops. We've actually provided the studies and the cases that are referenced in this on a thumb drive. We didn't print them all out. It's over 3,000 pages. But it is on a thumb drive that Mark will give to the clerk for this meeting to make a record and make it part of the minutes for this meeting. Some other cases involve the Charlotte, North Carolina case, the Taylor case that we cite there that talk about adult stores and regulating them. The courts are pretty uniform in saying that a city doesn't have to produce local secondary effects to justify their location regulations in their zoning ordinance. If we go to slide 6, there are some more cases that deal with what the industry likes to call retail-only stores. In other words, in many cases, over the last couple of decades, going back about 20 years, maybe even closer to 30 years, the industry has argued, well, you know, unlike those places that have peep show booths or the live nude dance, what have you, we're just a retail store, and we just sell things for taking them home or off-site to consume them. And the courts, including the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, which of course is over cases coming out of North Dakota, have upheld regulations of retail-only adult stores as proper, based on the kinds of studies and documentation that have been supplied to the city of Fargo on this matter. And the ILQ Investments case out of Rochester, Minnesota is the case that I'm thinking about. But more recent cases, Spokane, Washington, and then just a few years ago in Indianapolis, Indiana, uphold regulation of these types of retail adult stores. If we go to slide 7, one of the reasons that the regulation is a little bit more freer in this area is that unlike magazines and videos and things like that, that at least are presumptively protected by the First Amendment, the Supreme Court has held that these sexual devices aren't speech, and so they're in a different category. It's really, you know, if you're selling water pipes or tobacco, these are all three-dimensional objects, and sexual devices are no different from that. And there's some case law in the Eighth Circuit a couple of years ago out of Jonesboro, Arkansas, that basically upheld a zoning ordinance as applied to a store that wanted to open in Jonesboro. And the court said, well, you're not selling magazines and videos and other media items. You're just selling these devices, and that's not a protected speech issue. And then on slide 8, some of the cases and some of the studies that we are referencing with regard to secondary effects, they really span the gamut, I would say, of large cities and small cities. I mean, for example, on this slide number 8, you have an expert report from Jackson County, Missouri, in a case that we handled many years ago. Jackson County is where Kansas City, Missouri is, so a very large county, upholding regulations of retail adult stores based on the expert criminologist study that is in the record here today, and it was presented in that case. And then you have Oklahoma City, which of course is a large city. But below that, in number 4, there's a article about adverse impacts and particularly armed robberies that occurred at a location in a very small community in rural Illinois, in a case that we represented the municipality with the Attorney General's Office of Illinois. And then number 5 are excerpts from articles and statistics about why sex stores and these sexual device shops and adult retail stores tend to be hot spots for certain crimes, including armed robbery. They're often places that are open late at night. They there's cash in the drawer, everything around them is closed. They just present some criminological and land use impact type reasons for being attractants of criminal activity. And then in the next slide 9, the courts have looked at challenges to these ordinances and have said, the findings of these secondary effects is robust. It's been confirmed in a wide variety of sources in cities large and small. A lot of the industry data based just on calls for police services is flawed because there's a lot of crime in adult establishments that never result in a call to the police. And then all subclasses of sexually oriented businesses, including the retail-only adult store subclass, are associated with these adverse secondary effects. If we can go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what Mark summarized in his introduction, is the adult use provisions were last amended, from what we can tell, in 1998, some 24 years ago, almost 25 years ago. And it's due time for amendments to the LDC to address various legal and industry developments and update or modernize the definitions. This text amendment maintains the zones where adult uses can be allowed in the GC, LI, and GI zoning districts, subject to that 1,250-foot buffer from sensitive land uses. Spells out a measurement method, and it updates various terms throughout the definition section for adult establishments. And then on slide 11, we explain some of those. We update the definition of adult bookstore, adult cinema, adult entertainment facility, adult arcade, sexual device shop, and various supporting definitions for terms that are used in those main definitions. And then we specify, make it very clear in the text of the ordinance that the secondary effects is the rationale for regulating these types of establishments, and lay out the findings that support the adult use regulations. And then last is I'm going to ask that thumb drive provided to Mark be and provided to the Planning Commission be put into the record, and then I'll be available for any questions. But it's a pretty straightforward text amendment that update the land development code in this arena. Thank you very much for your patience and for somewhat of a longer presentation, but I thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you. Mark, is there anything additional?
The recommended motion is on the screen, and staff is in support of approving.
This is a public hearing item. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to add anything to this agenda item? Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Mark, as we push the land development code down the road a little bit now, in general, do you see this item as we redo the land development code in the future? You see this item being left alone? Or do you see it being readdressed when we come to it in the final draft of our say 3, 4, 5 years down the road when we get the new land development code developed?
In my personal opinion, I feel that, this is probably the foundation for the newer language that has been supported by case law. And I anticipate the collaborated effort of trying to get public participation may find other types of avenues that the community wants to go, but I think this will be the foundation of that, and it might get minorly modified based on that.
So it's essentially we're nibbling a little piece of what we might have to do down the road in this area. You might say.
You could say we're working on the land development code rewrite right now.
Okay. All right.
Any other comments from commissioners? Questions? Go ahead.
I have a question about, these adverse effects on here. It seems very kind of arbitrary that it's just couldn't we attach this to alcohol establishments or vape businesses? Like, it just kind of, it rubs me the wrong way that we're just focusing on one item. I mean, let's use what's been in the news recently, the romantic site, just 2 doors down from where they are proposed to go, there's a vape shop, but I don't see how that had any pushback from anyone. And I mean, that's a epidemic that's really harming our youth and our community, and we have 2 of those on Broadway. So it seems like we're just jumping on this and kind of attacking a very specific retail establishment that, the people that go to these kind of businesses, they're kind of getting shamed to having to go out to a place that's in the industrial area of town and to get, whatever you buy at these establishments, and we're just kind of pushing it like out of sight, out of mind, and it just really rubs me the wrong way that we're putting all this language in here that just feels extremely arbitrary and kind of offensive to the people that are patrons to this kind of establishment. So this isn't really, I guess, really a question, but more of just my thoughts as I look through this, that it doesn't seem like something that we should be regulating, because it's not this, like, I don't know, sleazy establishment that maybe you might think of like old timey like places like in olden days where like prostitutes would be, and that's kind of like where when I read this, it's like, oh, is that the kind of establishment we're talking about? Are we talking about some place where you can just buy like it feels weird to say this on public record, but dildos, right? Like you can go to Target and get those things. So do we need to go after Target for selling those? So I don't know. I just read this and I'm extremely confused and very uncomfortable with all of this. So I guess there's no question there, but just thoughts.
Mark, do you have
Mark,
any?
you want me to?
Oh, good.
Sure.
Well, I think there's a couple things in order. First of all, alcohol is regulated separately, but the classification of a commercial establishment based on its trade in alcohol does not afford any constitutional protection like some adult uses get by virtue of selling material that is media driven, or by virtue of having live nude conduct in the form of nude dancing or something like that. So the courts have ruled differently, and cities around the country treat adult uses as a separate category simply because whatever state regulation attends tobacco sales or attends alcohol sales does not adult uses. That's principally been a local zoning and licensing regulatory approach. And then the other thing is, I know you use some terms like sleazy and things like that. Nobody, text amendment says that. What's been documented, even with regard to retail stores, is someone might say, I don't want to buy a residential home that's adjacent to or within 100 feet of an adult store of whatever variety. They're not necessarily making a judgment about the store as it is, hey, that's driving down my property values. I don't want to say turn left at the corner at the adult store. So there are a lot of land use-based impacts that are independent of some of the concerns that have been articulated. But we think that the proper balance is to make sure that there are enough sites in the city. And unlike many jurisdictions that do require adult uses to be located in the LI and the GI type manufacturing zones, the city has for a long time allowed adult uses in the GC zone, and they are continued to be allowed in that general commercial zone, which is somewhat unique, except like many other types of uses, they're not allowed, for example, in the DMU. So there's been some special tax incentives and development considerations and many years of planning investment for the DMU. So from a standpoint of where adult uses are allowed, this is actually a little bit more permissive in the sense of it's got a little bit smaller buffer between two adult uses. And so I think staff and council thought, or outside council thought, this strikes the appropriate balance by continuing to allow uses, but just updating the uses that we're defining and making it clear where they're regulated, but not diminishing at all the number of locations, including in the GC zone where adult uses can operate.
Has staff looked at a map that shows the 1,250 feet radius out of each of these things?
Yes, we have that and have drawn that up.
I mean, there's sufficient areas where you could have this type of, it's not like the whole town's covered in one of the bubbles.
Reviewing this with the attorneys, the assumption is yes, there's enough available land uses out there that would allow this.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
thank you. Mark, I see in this section, the part 2 of section A, can you tell me what that alcohol on-premise license under chapter 25 means? Is that restaurants, bar? I mean, what is that? Is that something specific?
Yeah, that's any establishment that dispenses alcohol.
Okay, so restaurant, anything like that?
Correct.
Okay. Isn't that going to cause quite a bit of narrowing, though, of the locations? By having any alcohol served at all with 1,250 feet away? But, I mean, I guess if you've looked at the map, but I'm a little concerned that we're really tightening this thing down, especially when you include all of the pieces here with the adult entertainment definition of all the different things that are adult entertainment.
That
I don't-
1,250-foot buffer has been in place since the Land Development Code was implemented in
Okay.
'98.
For this, with alcohol like this?
Correct.
Okay.
But for smaller quantity businesses, though, you're expanding your definition a lot with the sex device,
Well-
right? And-
Go ahead.
I think that just to address that point, Mark's correct that the 1,250-foot buffer from alcohol has been the same, and although there are more sub-definitions for the adult establishment definition in this text amendment, that's really no different as far as expansion because the code has already had a subsection that says if you have a similar use to one of the listed uses that you would be subject to the restrictions as determined by the planning director for those similar uses. So I think it just takes that and makes that more explicit. And I think you'll note in sub 3, right under the reference provision on alcohol on premises dispensing establishments, you have the buffer between adult uses being reduced from 1,250 feet to 750 feet. So in that sense, it makes sure that there are enough sites. We have looked at the map, and having looked at cities and zoning maps and how many sites are allowed based on the size of the city and the population, all that, we feel very confident that Fargo has plenty of available sites for this land use.
Go ahead, John.
In hindsight, how did the location on 25th Street and whatever the 600 block with a trailer park across the street, how did that get located there?
If I could jump in, or do you want me to? Yeah, so we want to talk about the text amendment, and basically the text amendment that's being proposed in front of you today is not changing any of our regulations that are in the code today. So the purpose of the purpose of the text amendment that's in front of you today is to clarify the definitions that are in our land development code today. So nothing is changing regarding regulation. It's really just the definitions and clarity. Over the last 20 years, the definitions and the industry of adult uses has changed dramatically thanks to technology and markets, et cetera. And so that is what's in front of you today.
Could I ask a follow-up on that? Because that makes sense. Do we expect, with the change of definition, that any new businesses in town now fall into this definition that didn't previously meet the definition?
I'm not sure if I'm following your question.
By changing the definition, are any businesses out there operating right now that couldn't reestablish in the same spot with the same use?
We don't know that. Right now, we're trying to clarify our definition so that we know how to regulate it moving forward.
One more question. So on A1, you talk about recreation facilities, but you exclude bike paths as a recreation facility. So adult entertainment centers can be right on the bike path where,
No, I can.
I was just curious, why do we exclude public bike paths that have kids in public on them, just like a recreation facility would, or a school or a park, or?
That was in the code from 1998. And
But it's our code, so I mean, why are
did
we
not change
excluding it?
So again, the intention of today's code, text amendment, is to modernize our code to meet what's been litigated across the country. And what else is in here, subjectivity to the city of Fargo, would be updated as part of the land development code overall. It might be in relationship to Commissioner Schmidt's comments and the comments I'm hearing today. As we do the land development code update and our growth plan update, which is getting ready to start at the start of the year, we might find the city's values are entirely different than what they were in 1998 when we adopted this code. So what we want to do today is focus on the legally defensible words as they've been litigated across the country.
I understand what you'd like to focus on, I guess, but you're asking us to amend this sentence in our LDC, and so I'm curious why we have this sentence the way we do.
We can strike bike path
So I
facilities.
was just, if we had a reason for it, I'd like to hear it.
Well, it's not a use, it's not a land use. It'd be like trying to regulate against a road or a street or infrastructure.
We have a lot of pieces of property in the city that are very narrow that go in between houses that the park district will maintain, so we can have connectivity from actual parks to other parks. I think the intent was to make those not part of this. In addition, when you start doing the measurements based on those narrow parcels, they're usually covered anyway by the residential land use. But in addition, you know, as we try creating more walkable communities, we're pushing for 10, 12-foot paths along our arterials. And I would be afraid how that might be labeled as a bike path, and then it might limit a lot of the entire city.
And I guess if we're as a city, if you're asking us to say that we recognize these establishments have increased crime rates, increased illicit drug use, increased trafficking, why wouldn't we want our bike paths to be safe from those things either?
Well, I think his.
I can.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just say I could address that from the commissioner. I think the goal here is, you know, we've had a question about are we relegating these to too few sites in the city, and we're striking a balance with making sure that we meet the constitutional test to have sufficient number of sites. And I think from what Mr. Williams is saying, I gather that having the bike path language in there does not have a significant impact on sites because it's covered by other buffers or otherwise not available sites near bike paths. But the goal is to amend it to strike that balance, to have enough sites, but to not have too few sites, if that makes sense. And the reality is you could say, well, we're going to buffer it from movie theaters and we're going to buffer it from roller skating rinks. You could go into a Chuck E. Cheese pizza place. You could go into a number of land uses that would be harder to cite on a map and find and make sure you're meeting the constitutional test. And you could go overboard with land uses that are not easily discernible or not discernible in the sense that maybe it's a storefront church that doesn't have to get a business license or is not showing up in the parcel layer data of the GIS. So what we've done here is, I think what Ms. Crutchfield said, and that is make sure we have up-to-date language and clarity moving forward, make sure that we're meeting the sufficiency of alternative sites and providing buffers for the key sensitive land uses, although it's true that we could find a number of other land uses that we would love to buffer if the requirement of having sufficient sites were not in play. And this is just the appropriate balance from the data we've seen in the GIS.
Have you looked at the data in GIS with bike paths?
I believe Mr. Williams did that when he generated the maps and ran different. I know there were multiple permutations of different buffer distances, and I'm not the GIS technician, but I believe that those were examined during that process.
Yeah, we did look into that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So speaking of modernizing the land use code, that certainly makes sense. Last month, we had a discussion around parking allotments and modernization that could happen on that front. So what is your prioritization process that regulation of adult establishments, which is a very narrow band, is the highest priority that you have to work on as compared to parking regulations that can impact a wide variety of businesses across the town?
I think based on the current situation that's going on right now, that's what increased the priority as far as making sure that we had legally defensible language within our land development code as we go into the future.
So targeting one business.
Well, I heard a couple things. I heard.
Just hold on. Just to clarify, we're not talking about one business with this item. It is a type of business. And so it's separate from the lawsuits that we've heard about in the paper.
Sure.
But I think from the city's standpoint is they are digging into this as a staff and as a legal team. And so the expertise is there, the experience is there. So doing this now is efficient because they're already having to do that for other items. And so that I think having those together, they don't have to re-spin everybody up at a later time. So I see why they're doing it now because that's what staff's spending time on and it makes sense.
Sure.
That would be my thought from what I've heard. So.
One of the questions then, is West Acres specifically excluded from this in the definition of the size of property?
I can let Scott answer that.
Can you repeat that question for me, Mark?
Is West Acres excluded in the definition?
West Acres?
The regional mall.
Oh, that's a definitely, West Acres is your regional mall. I didn't know the name of it. Sorry. Yes, the reason there's a number of land use impacts that are associated with regional malls or a number of land use characteristics. For example, most of them, per this definition, have interior-facing storefronts. They control their own signage. They usually have mall security that is on site. They have earlier closing hours. Most of the time, the mall closes at 9 p.m. They have large parking lots that are exterior to the inward-facing storefronts that provide a natural buffer from land uses. And this ordinance is very similar to one that was adopted several years ago in Grand Forks that had a similar regional shopping mall definition, and that ordinance was challenged and was upheld. So that's the reason. There's just some unique characteristics of a regional land use mall that have some built-in protections from a land use perspective.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Can you explain the rationale behind the 1,250-foot buffer? It seems pretty arbitrary to me.
1,250
Well,
was... Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say that was the pre-existing buffer that's been in the code for 20 years. So we looked at the data and saw no reason to change it in terms of there are plenty of sites at that buffer. And in every city, I think the goal is more or less the same, and that is to provide a sufficient number of sites while maximizing the buffer to provide protection against adverse secondary effects. And so if you have a number like 1250 and that provides more protection than, let's say, a 500-foot buffer, but you still have plenty of available sites under the standards for adult uses at the 1,250 feet, then that strikes the appropriate balance from a legal perspective.
Any other comments on this item? And I believe we've closed the public hearing, so if any commissioner wants to take action.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the findings and recommendations of staff and hereby recommend approval to the City Commission of the proposed text amendment. That's it.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Just to clarify, that is the recommended motion, the whole recommended motion?
Yes.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, please take the roll.
Schmidt,
No.
Shuey,
Nay.
Tassa,
Aye.
Gunkelman,
Aye.
Morgan,
Aye.
Rosenberg,
Aye.
Schneider.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Scott, for being with us today.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Now we have three other items under other items. Just for everyone's awareness, these are not public hearing items, so there won't be a chance to call for a public hearing. But I will, just wanted to point it out while we get to this. D2 is about the block mixed-use development for the Dwayne's Pizza Edition. There is a public meeting at 5 o'clock right across the way at the Sky Commons, just in the Civic Auditorium. So if you wanted to just get that out there. Otherwise, Donald, feel free to go ahead with D1.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. This afternoon, we have the Metropolitan Park Third Edition Planned Unit Development Final Plan. And let me orient you here. So this, you can see my cursor. This looks a little familiar to your commission here. This Metropolitan Park Third Edition was before your commission for approval on March 1st of 2021. There's an existing apartment building there. The applicant proposed to build an additional apartment building, connect the two, have a planned unit development, have a high-density development, a taller building, include some amenities there, including the potential for having an on-site childcare. And so, as part of the planned unit development process, prior to getting building permits approved, the applicant has to come back with a final plan, which should look pretty much like the mastery land use plan, which was approved at the PUD. Just for your reference, last month, in the November 1st Planning Commission, you looked at a plat of this property up here, which was Calico Prairie Third Edition. That's just across the street from this, but that's an unrelated project. So there's just been a lot of action here on a little bit up to the east of 45th Street here. And again, zoning here is MR3, multi-dwelling residential with a planned unit development. This is the master plan here that was approved, and this is the proposed final plan. There are some slight differences, particularly on the south side here. As noted in your staff report, I'm filling in today for Brad Garcia, our planner. He had to be out today, so he did the staff report, and I'm filling in here for him. The master plan shows a portion of the existing garage is actually being replaced with stormwater pond, and a second underground garage is shown. Some of these garages do remain on the final plan here, but as staff reviewed it and analyzed it, it appears that all the requirements of the Land Development Code and the PUD are still being met. There's considerable time in the development world. 6 months between March and several months between March and now is quite a ways, and things do evolve a little bit there. But staff feels that this still is enough in line with the master plan that you can recommend it for approval. This is something your commission approves. It does not go forward to the city commission. So our recommendation is for approval. Nate Volmuth, Goldmark Design and Development, is again the applicant for this one, and he may have some additional comments or be able to answer your questions if you have any. That concludes staff's presentation. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Donald. Mr. Volmuth, would you like to add anything on this? Sir.
Just one question, and
Will you please introduce yourself when you come to the podium?
Thank you. Commissioners, Nate Volmuth with Goldmark Design Development.
yeah, and I take it with the redesign of this, that the parking that's lost, actually, it actually looks like you actually pick up additional parking, or you will be absorbed with the other buildings?
Yes, the previous plan had one level of underground parking and parking on first floor and then apartments stacked above. This plan has underground parking with apartments on first floor, and then the rest of the parking is outside.
Okay, but due to the size of the building, you pick up quite a bit of parking, I take it.
Yes, we do have adequate parking per the PUD.
Okay.
Yep.
That was it.
Tommy, go ahead.
Did the dog park go away? That was in the first iteration.
I don't believe there was a dog park in the first iteration. There is quite a bit of open space and a detention pond, which will only have water in it during a significant rain event. There are quite a few other amenities in the facility as well, which I believe is listed in the packet.
I was just curious, the first iteration says there's a dog park on the northeast corner and then a daycare playground on the exterior, and I just don't see it on
The daycare playground is still part of the plan. The dog park is not on the plan, at this point.
There it is, Commissioner.
Oh, the dog park maybe is part of the existing building. Thanks for finding that. The building on the east side of the exhibit is an existing building, and most of what we've been working on is everything to the west.
Oh, so the dog park is not listed here, I believe. That's your concern,
Sure.
Commissioner, correct?
I was just curious, yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Volmuth? Seeing none, commissioners, any other questions in general or discussion? Someone will make a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve per staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, take the roll.
Rosenberg,
Aye.
Dunkelman,
Aye.
Shui,
Aye.
Morgan,
Aye.
Tossa,
Aye.
Schmidt,
Aye.
Schneider.
Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you, Commissioners.
We'll ask Megan up. Just to squash any rumors, there's not Dwayne's Pizza being served with the Dwayne's Pizza edition.
That's correct. Good afternoon, Chair and Commission. This is item D2. This is an introduction to an item that is tentatively scheduled for the January 3rd Planning Commission meeting. We received this application, and so we're bringing this forward to you as part of a two-step process. Many of you are familiar. It's a typical thing that we do when we receive an application for a planned unit development is to bring this forward one time initially to get some review and comments and feedback and questions kind of answered, and then to bring back a bit more formally at a different planning commission meeting. And so we're here today to introduce this to your commission to get comments and feedback. The developer is here today and wishes to address your commission after staff's brief presentation. What we expect in January for entitlements is a planned unit development, which is 3 components, one of which Donald had just presented on. But there's a zoning change, there's a master plan, and then there's a final plan. Those are the 3 components to a PUD. And with that, we anticipate a plat, a minor subdivision entitled Dwayne's Pizza Edition. Up on your screen shows the location here. We're talking about the 1600 block of University Drive South. It's on the west side. It's bounded by University, 16th Avenue on the north, 17th Avenue on the south, and 13th and a half Street on the west. The developer is proposing a 5-story mixed-use building with commercial and interior parking on the first floor. So you can see, if you were to kind of take a cutout of the foundation, this is what it would look like. So you can see some retail commercial here on the east side of the building, and then on the side here. And then on the west side of the building would be interior parking. You will see here a little cut through on this main floor for some pickup or some stacking or drive-throughs here. And then on the second floor and above, that would be just one building that later images will show. There is underground parking proposed at this location as well. And then floors 2 through 5 would be residential apartments. Up on your screen are elevations, and so the one at the bottom would be what would be facing University. And then again at the bottom would be facing west on 13th and a half Street. And then here I'll just go quickly through, and we can go back to these images if there's any questions, but these are just some renderings that the developer has provided. So here you're looking from University Drive and 16th Avenue North towards the southwest, looking into the site. And this is just still on University Drive on 17th Avenue, looking northwest into the site. And these are images that show the rear of the site. So you can see on 13th and a half Avenue here, the building does do a cutout. There's some amenity space proposed on that second floor, so it's not a full kind of box everywhere, 2 through floor, or all the floors, not a full box. There's open areas, and it's kind of set back there. This is just from the other direction, showing a different perspective on that backside, 13th and a half Avenue. There is, as Chair Schneider was mentioning, there is an open house meeting today shortly at 5 o'clock in Sky Commons, which is at the Civic Center just next door here from 5 o'clock to 6:30. This probably does look a little bit different in terms of how we're presenting this to you. This is really the first major project that we've seen, that we've had an application for since the adoption of the core neighborhoods plan. This location is right kind of on the edge between two of our core neighborhoods. And so with that, we're really trying to kind of bump up our communications and our reach in hopes that we can get to some more people who can have an opportunity to review the project. So with this, we've done an extended mailing, an extended boundary. We've done some direct emails of folks who have participated in those two core neighborhoods, Lewis and Clark and Clara Barton, as part of the core neighborhoods plan, as well as who's had some neighborhood convening, some contacts that we know of. We also, we did a number of social media postings. Perhaps you have seen that on City of Fargo social media, as well as invited several of the boards and commissions, the planning department staffs. So at this time, we are presenting this to your commission to see what questions you have or what comments you have on this. And the developer, Jesse Craig, is here. He has a presentation that he might run through. And so if you've got any questions for staff, let me know. Otherwise, Jesse, I think would be glad to address your commission.
Any questions from staff? Or are you okay listening to the rest of the presentation first? So. Mr. Craig, do you have you got introduced with the presentation, so now you're committed, right?
Lucky me. Yeah, I suppose we'll just flip through the slides. It's a 127 unit mixed use project on South University, about 15,000 square feet of commercial. It's taken probably 3-4 years to put all this together. In full transparency, I actually did buy Dwayne's Pizza on October 17th to make this deal happen on the site. It's just the South University location that I did buy. But I think one of the biggest things we're having is a lot of questions as to why we're building the new project in the back, setback from University. We're trying to keep the character of the neighborhood and also oblige the businesses that are currently in the commercial spaces, which is Great Wall Chinese, the Medicine Shop Pharmacy, and then even before I bought Dwayne's, they had the intention of staying on that block, especially in that south corner. So again, for the neighborhood, we'll get more feedback from the neighborhood actually at 5 o'clock, but from what we had taken, on our initial mailings that we had sent out in a 300 feet radius, people were very interested in keeping that as one of the iconic restaurants in that area, same with Great Wall. So we're trying to appease that and keep them in that location, build a new project in the back, and then when that's ready, move them into the new project and then tear down the front and put the parking lot in with minimal disturbances to those businesses as they sit right now. We also tried to donate all the houses in the back, the single-family homes. They were in such disrepair that they were not able to be moved because the foundations were in such poor shape. Habitat for Humanity did come in and was able to strip the interiors of the houses, so they were able to get water heaters and air conditioning units and appliances and things like that. So they were able to take as much as they could out of those premises before they're torn down. I guess any questions for me? It's a pretty broad sweep, but.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I always appreciate the people willing to look at these and redevelop them. A couple of things I noticed, I appreciated the sort of more residential look from the west. I thought those pictures were nice. It makes sense why there's a offset from University then, so you don't have the alley in the back. It's against the residences, other, multifamily residences anyways. And I guess this also seems to alleviate a lot of traffic issues on University, not having the access onto University as far as, using the avenues to turn into it. So I assume that's purposeful as well. It seems like that would benefit everybody around there. But yeah, those are just my comments.
I've got some.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess first I want to commend you for bringing Habitat for Humanity in to take a look at those properties back there. That's a great use of that instead of just hauling it off to the landfill. So commend you on that. So I'll give you my perspective on this project. And this isn't directly in my neighborhood, but I live in the neighborhood just north of this, and I frequently walk on University and frequent these places quite often. And I know when this first got announced, I was really excited for a generational change to this block and how this block feels. And I will say, as a frequent pedestrian to this site, I was very disappointed to see the project pushed so far back from the street. When I do walk University, it's actually astonishing how many people I do see walking on University, and the pedestrians just have it tough over there. They're constantly competing with cars, and when I saw this, I was really disappointed that, gosh, I'm gonna have to compete even more, and now I have to compete with 3 drive-throughs. And I really thought of, I just don't know how we got to this point where it's in the back of this site. And so then I took a look at the Fargo Go 2030, what they state for infill development. And so I'll just read it. On initiative number 3, it says, strategies to promote walkable and bikeable connections amidst large surface parking lots include creating infill development that fronts the street, bolsters existing streetscapes with pedestrian amenities, parking reduction strategies, and considering approaches that arrange parking in a central lot tucked under buildings or in an internal structure or underground. So it doesn't feel like this type of infill development is in line with the city's goals of the Go 2030 initiative. And I guess I'll just keep speaking as a pedestrian perspective over here, that the vehicles just whiz by so fast on University, and I think it's pretty well documented, and the city's cited this as well, that getting those buildings closer to the street gives the drivers more of this edge, so it makes them slow down. It makes pedestrians feel more comfortable instead of being on the sidewalk between fast-moving traffic and then cars, and it's an uncomfortable environment. So as the project is set up currently, it's not a layout that I would support or move to approve on. I know we're not doing it at this meeting, so I would love for you and your team and the city to try to get this building closer to the street, because this is really a generational change to this entire block, and I think accommodating pedestrians in a very thoughtful and meaningful way is a lot. That's going to go a long way. So those are my thoughts on this project.
No offense, but one building I don't think is going to slow down South University. If you look at everything else that's set back along that whole corridor from 13th Avenue South all the way, past past Interstate, it's all set back. The main reason that we did that, though, even if it was a cleared site versus infill, we would literally have to give notice to Dwayne's Pizza. Every commercial tenant would have to be, displaced. And once they're displaced, they're not going to go set up a new establishment. If you read the letters from the staff or from the businesses, you'll see that they're not going to go and enter into a year-long lease. It'll be a 5-year lease. There's moving costs, things like that all go into that. We'd never get them back into that project. Mm-hmm. So I understand from the pedestrian to a degree, but it's also from those businesses that wish to stay in that project in their current locations. We're trying to abide by that, and we're not able to move the building closer without getting rid of them completely.
And I guess I appreciate that response. I guess for me, it's now you're coming, I guess, about one building not slowing the traffic. It is one building, but it's one entire block of a building. I would imagine in the lifespan of this building, the strip mall to the north would eventually get redeveloped in the next 100 years. The parking lot that's across the street that Essentia and Sanford owns, that might turn into an office building or a parking structure. So whatever we do on this site is really setting the tone for how that entire 5-block stretch from 13th to the interstate really feels. And so I guess this sets the tone for the rest of that entire neighborhood, and I don't think we should squander that opportunity to really transform what we're wanting for this section of Fargo and the residents around it.
Any other comments?
I would just like to ask engineering if there is any idea as to how, when that stretch is redone, the road is redone, do you have any idea how that's going to be applied to pedestrians?
So I would say that we're looking to make improvements to the pedestrian corridor there. What we've discussed to date is more just a wider pedestrian path, trying to get more room so we can get that more comfortableness on that pathway.
And so would there be traffic slowing then too, to kind of mediate that problem with pedestrian traffic?
I don't know, so I don't know exactly what you're asking. So right now, we have a two-way roadway, right? So it's about 4 or 5 lanes along there. And so to date, we have not talked about any narrowing of the roadway other than when those roadways would have been built. I don't know for sure what the lane widths are, but typically they're about 12 feet. And now our standard is more like a 10.5, 11. So we gain more boulevard space by narrowing those lanes also.
Thank you.
I guess Commissioner Schmidt, I liked all your goals you talked about, and I guess I just disagree with applying it to this, where I feel that this does a lot of that. Because, as Brenda said, the goal isn't to slow down traffic on University, but what this does is it takes all the entrances off University, which are by far the most dangerous for pedestrians.
Why is,
Well, just let me finish. And so, walking across those access points is incredibly dangerous now, so it slows down people entering the businesses with their cars by making them go onto the avenue first and then in. And so in some ways, it moves the pedestrians, away from having to impact cars on University. For sure. And it makes them, come down to the business too, away from the traffic. Because if the city's not planning or willing to slow down University traffic, moving the businesses right up against it is going to be even more dangerous. So I'd say this is much safer. And then on the back side, it's much more in line with Go 2030 for the residential neighborhood. To move these toward University and have the backside as the parking lot or the business access for trucks to deliveries and everything else, that makes that whole neighborhood not compliant then too. And so we are somewhat, it's a redevelopment, right? So it's always you're balancing the different traits, and it's not ideal if we were to make a brand new property like this, but given everything else around, I think it did a good job doing those things. And so I was interested in your comments because I agree with them, other than how they apply to this. I just see it differently.
and I apologize for cutting you off. I will just say, I hope you try being a pedestrian down there, because I think it's pretty well documented that vehicles and speeding in Fargo, and especially on University, it's a problem. And there's a lot of really well documented research that shows that putting buildings fronting streets create a better pedestrian environment, because vehicles do slow down when you have those implied obstacles to the sides of you. That's why we plant street trees. That's why we narrow lanes, is because that slows the traffic down. And as a pedestrian, it's really awful walking that stretch. And I'm surprised by how many people do walk that stretch. And we have bus stops along there as well. So I guess I would disagree with your assessment of the Fargo Go 2030, how this is better when I read earlier the exact verbiage from it. So that seems to contradict what this states on there. So, and I guess this is just what I've been reading online as well, from comments on social media that the city has been putting out, just seeing what people are writing on there. And this seems to be a fairly strong sentiment with others as well. So I'm excited to hear what the open house has to say.
Go ahead, John.
Jesse, according to this plan, it appears right now the sidewalk is against the street. In this plan, the sidewalk, you actually have a berm, or a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? A buffer between the sidewalk and the street, which isn't there now. So I'm not sure where you're going with your comments, because this has got a buffer. Right now, you have cars in the current parking lot that's there right now. The bumpers of the cars hang over onto the sidewalk. I live right here. I've lived there for 46 years. This is a great improvement. We go to the Great Wall quite often, and getting into that driveway between there and the medicine shop and pulling out on the University, instead of going to the, 17th Street or 17th Avenue, you have a stoplight. And now you're gonna route a lot of that traffic around to the back to come back to get onto the street. This is 1,000% improvement about what's there now. So I'm not sure, I'm not quite sure where your comments are coming from.
Well, we're trying to, take into account that if we did have it right on South University, I mean, there's gonna be tenants that are gonna be living above there. There's 4 floors of them. And they'd be right on South University, and the traffic noise and things like that. And, I'm all about slowing down traffic. I was all about getting rid of the one-ways downtown, and, look how well that turned out, and the 3-2-1, on Broad or on Main Street and things like that as we approached, the river. All those things I think were great. But when we're trying to, put a rooftop patio on there, and we're trying to, put that against the core neighborhood to buffer that so it's not 5 stories right up against the 13th and a half, So we're trying to take all those things into account. So I do understand. We just try to accomplish the best we can with what we got, so.
Yeah, and I think what it tells us as a city is we've talked a lot about core neighborhoods, and every year that definition probably expands as these areas that were built a decade later now become our core neighborhoods. And we're going to run into these challenges and debates on every time we need to do a redevelopment. So they're good discussion.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask, now, just within this illustration, does that buffer go on both sides of the sidewalk?
I don't know if you can.
You're talking
Is-
on,
Is the sidewalk at the center of the buffer, so there's green space on either side?
there's an easement that runs on there for the city, so I don't know. I know on ours, on between the sidewalk and the parking lot, we plan on having trees and bushes and things in that. And I know we had talked with planning and zoning engineering in regards to what they wanted to put in that easement space.
I can maybe answer that. We have, and Brenda can chime in too, but we have a standard on where location of public sidewalk goes in its proximity to the property line. And so usually it's within about 2.5 feet from the property line, and then beyond that between the sidewalk. Really depends on how much right-of-way is there, how big that buffer width is. Of course, when you're in downtown or some really tighter areas of town, the buffer width isn't always there, and it varies, as you can see kind of on the site plan. The width of it varies, but for context, it's really hard to see. But between the sidewalk and the parking, I believe is about 9 feet from the property line. And so if you're looking kind of towards the university side, that width of that buffer, except for the turn lane on the south side, is a lot wider. So it just kind of varies around the block, if that helps answer that question. Commissioner Morgan?
Can there be an expectation that that buffer zone will continue as the redevelopment happens along that stretch, so that there would be some uniformity?
I can't speak to how much right-of-way there is on the other blocks, but I think the intent with that is that it would be uniform as much as possible. And then the space between the parking and the sidewalk would need to meet the land development code at this time. I don't believe Jesse's team is proposing to vary at all from that. And so, for example, the buffer width on a parking lot per the land development code varies based on how large your parking lot is. So if you only have a handful of cars, you might only have 4 feet, for example, between maybe the property line. Here, his parking lot is large enough, or what he's proposing is to have the 9 feet. So that space may vary upon redevelopment depending on what happens on different blocks.
I was just thinking of the pedestrian aspect, that if there was some uniformity there, it would protect the pedestrians throughout the whole length. And I would assume that would have been part of the plan, but I think it's premature because that's some years down the road. Is that right, Brenda?
Correct. we do not have the redevelopment of university on the forefront right now. And part of the problem with that is including this parking lot, is you see such a tight space there because their parking lots are encroaching in the right of way. So by having these redevelopments, we're able to clean up that encroachment, get that right of way back, and then create that buffer.
Thank you.
And so there, you're not looking for any action for, oh, I guess, sorry.
Just one other question, just the feedback from the neighborhood, especially those to the west, how would you characterize that, and anything that they brought up that you've been able to incorporate into your planning?
Well, when we sent out our mailings, we didn't have any response back, but now I'm kind of the guinea pig for the new quarter mile, which I was approached on, and I'm fine with that. I've had lots of neighborhood meetings throughout my years at this. So I'm not a social media guy, so I really wanted to go into this meeting at 5 o'clock tonight with kind of a clean slate. So I have not read any of the posts. I know city staff has kind of alerted me to a few issues or concerns, which we'll address tonight. And I'm not bribing them with Dwayne's Pizza, so I'm going to be completely good that way.
I'll settle. I'll settle for Great Wall. I mean,
I grew up on Great Wall, so all the generations that went through that. So, I mean, great establishments. But so to answer your question, sir, I really haven't been on social media or broached those questions ahead of time. I didn't engage anybody purposefully because I wanted to have a really good open conversation tonight and good dialogue.
Sorry, maybe Chair and Commissioner, probably just to summarize what next steps will look like. We'll have the open meeting, the public meeting tonight. For anybody watching publicly, I know some of the Facebook comments were, with the weather and it's, I think there's some people that were concerned it's a one and done opportunity for public feedback, but that's not the case. If you have comments on this, or if you commissioners have more feedback for us that you want us to consider into the planned unit development ordinance draft as we start to work on that, feel free to email planning@fargond.gov, and we'll get those comments incorporated. And from the planning staff's perspectives, we're as Jesse mentioned, wanting to kind of go into the public meeting or the open house with an open mind, knowing we have our Go 2030 core neighborhood plan as guides to help us, and we're going to kind of bring all these comments together. So thanks for your feedback today, and we're going to bring all those comments together to try to see what that synthesis looks like, and work with Jesse to get whatever updates or changes are needed based on what we hear.
Thank you. So that email address is planning@fargond.gov if you have comments, just to reiterate. Any other comments from commissioners?
I'd just like to say that I have been following some social media regarding this project, and the biggest complaint or question is there are so few places to dine along that strip there that people seem to be really concerned that they were going to be missing Dwayne's and Great Wall.
It's the Fargo staple, right?
Yes. And then also the medicine shop. There are so many people that go from that neighborhood, the neighborhoods around there. But I know I've heard from speaking to them that they are going to be staying.
Yes. Yep, they wish to, so that's the hope.
Well, let's hope this makes them more successful. So moving on, if there's any other comments, we're good. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Craig.
And I'll make one last comment.
Yeah.
Your commission is invited to the neighborhood meeting and encouraged to attend as well.
Thank you. Our last item is D3, the 2023 Planning Commission calendar. No action on this. I will make note that there's a couple meetings this coming year that happen on Thursday, I believe, in July and September, just to jump around the holidays. So just make notes. They have little asterisks next to them. But if anybody knows of a major conflict on any of these, please let us know sooner than later. Otherwise, we have our friends from MetroCog here today. Is just here to watch, or do you have anything you want to talk about, or?
No, we were in a meeting before this and I attended the development.
Perfect. You're always welcome. Good to have you here. Yep. Thank you. Otherwise, take a motion to adjourn. Motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we're adjourned. Thank you.